I spent the entire last week testing and perfecting STORMCLAW to make sure it's as good as possible for Abattoir of Zero, and I'm very confident that this is the best version possible for that new content. If you're one of the people that's used my previous versions of the build, it's important to note that this version of the build requires a more active playstyle. So if you're somebody that just wants to hold down 2 buttons and clear content, then I highly suggest that you stick with the ultimate STORMCLAW build. But if you're wanting to push this build to the maximum, then this is the version for you. Since this build accomplishes something similar to the Poison Claw build, but just does it better, I'm going to be replacing the Poison Claw build with this. Sorry, X-Falls, you're just not consistent enough without the Tempest Roar, and we like our other helmets more. And for the default written guide, I made sure to use as many legendaries as possible so that you don't have to worry about unique items as much. Well, gosh darn it, if I just had one more Harlequin crest, I'd finish my Exodia. Don't worry, if you guys don't have the Uber uniques, you're still good to go. Gorsh! But I'm also going to lay out what uniques are useful and when you can put them on. I'd also like to give a shout out to Ace of Spades for double checking my math and my choices on this build. You guys might remember that my start of season build had Earth and Might as the keystone passive, and we're going back to using it again. This came as a result of additional testing I was able to do, as well as a loss of critical strike chance that allows this build to really pop off. But I know that you guys will be extremely satisfied with this build. So before we get into the actual build, take a look at my Mobalytics profile. If you're somebody that wanted one of the older versions of the build, you can scroll down to where saved builds are, and this is where my unpublished builds are. This is where you're going to find the previous version of the Poison Claw build, and you can also see what my plans are for Abattoir of Zero. But don't worry, I'll be updating this build with the new Paragon boards as soon as the Abattoir of Zero comes out. For our skills, we're going to be using Claw, Blood Howl, Hurricane, Cyclone Armor, Debilitating Roar, and Petrify. I know some of you guys are not big fans of Cyclone Armor, but let me explain why Cyclone Armor is important. First off, we removed Poison Creeper because it was a little bit clunky in the build, and we can still poison everything in the pile when we pull them in. Our Claw hits in a small AoE, and the enemies are so compacted that you're going to be able to poison them easily. We also don't need that increased 20% critical strike chance because we have our Earth and Might. And when you're hitting a group of enemies, you have Earth and Might all the time. Now what Cyclone Armor is doing for us, that 30% damage reduction that only lasts 2 seconds, is not triggered until you take damage. That means if a turret decides to shoot at you from off the screen, its damage will be reduced by 30%. That's going to prevent those awkward one-shots that you run into sometimes. Not to mention the passive non-physical damage reduction is just nice.
It finally happened. I'm a content creator now.
And that's because of today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Now, I actually had the advantage of playing this game before I got the sponsorship, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. For me, this is the type of game that I would play when I'm in a waiting room, or when I'm on the toilet, or anytime that I have my phone and I don't have access to my PC. This game is a free-to-play fantasy RPG with tons of champions and factions free to play. They have all of your fantasy staples like orcs and elves, and a diverse array of other types of fantasy creatures for you to choose. This game is available on Android, iOS, and PC, and you can get it right now by using the link in the description or by scanning my QR code on the screen. By using my link, you're going to be able to get 2 epic heroes and 1 rare. You'll get a Lightsworn, which is a very strong epic champion. When you reach level 15, you'll get a super strong epic champion called Juliana, and she's a great boss killer. In addition, if you use the promo code Monkey King within the first 72 hours, you'll get Sung Wukong, which is a super strong legendary hero. But make sure you use the link I listed below because it won't work if you don't. To redeem promo codes, you're going to tap on the left side of the screen and click promo codes. Once you're in the promo code window, just type in your code, hit confirm, and you're good to go. After that, you can find the rewards in your inbox. But as I said before, this is available on Android and iOS, as well as the PC. So feel free to play on whatever platform works for you. Get Raid Shadow Legends for yourself for free right now by clicking on the link in the description or using the QR code on the screen. Now, for anyone that's new to the build, when we're using Claw, we're also casting Storm Strike. That's due to the Great Staff of the Crone's abilities. That means we're using 2 basic attacks at the same time. Our Blood Howl is going to be triggering our Vigilance passive, which is a 15% damage reduction. This also gives us an attack speed boost and heals us. We probably don't need the healing most of the time, but it's still nice to have. Our Hurricane we're not using for the damage, we're using this for the 20% damage reduction, but it can still proc lucky hits for things like Calm Before the Storm. Our Debilitating Roar becomes much less needed in this version of the build, but it's still a nice thing to have to kind of fill the gaps between our ultimates. But if you're playing this build correctly, you should have your ultimate up almost all the time. You can nearly permanently stun and pull in everything on the screen all the time. And that's with Petrify. Petrify is not only stunning everything, but we're also pulling everything in because of our Airidah's Inexorable Will Ring. And this ring has a secondary pull effect that happens a few seconds after the initial pull. Because we're using Flickerstep boots, we're able to get our ultimate off cooldown extremely quickly by dashing through the enemies that we pull together. We pull them together, we dash through, that's instantly 10 seconds removed. Considering that your ultimate cooldown should be about 30 seconds after you have everything else in the build, that's an entire third of the cooldown duration. And you can continue to dash every couple of attacks that you do. This combined with Calm Before the Storm means that your ultimate will be up all the time. And because we're using Calamity, we're increasing the duration of our ultimate. That's more time that the enemies are stunned, and more time that we get increased critical strike damage. And like we talked about before, because we're using Earth and Might, we have critical strikes all the time. Now, we've already talked about some of our spirit boons, but we're going to be taking Wariness, Iron Feather for more survivability, Avian Wrath for more critical strike damage, Calamity for that extended duration we talked about, and Calm Before the Storm for those cooldowns that we talked about. For the gear, the only uniques I'm recommending are the ones that are required to make the build function as it's intended. However, for an optimized build, I recommend Shaco for the helmet, and in a lot of situations, Tybalt's Will for the pants. However, if you need the extra armor or survivability, I recommend sticking with the legendary pants. If you don't need the armor, you can also run Temerity, which is an extremely good choice. For the helmet, I'm recommending Vigorous Aspect. On the chest armor, I'm recommending Disobedience Aspect. For the gloves, I'm recommending Overcharged Aspect. For the pants, I'm recommending Aspect of Might. We're going to use Flickerstep for our boots. Great Staff of the Crone for the weapon, and this is required. We'll run Rapid Aspect on our amulet. Mighty Storms Aspect for our ring. And for our second ring, we're going to be running Airidah's Inexorable Will. And just so you have a general idea of where to farm these uniques, Great Staff of the Crone and Airidah's Inexorable Will both come from Varshan. You can also get the Great Staff of the Crone from the Zir boss. And then Harlequin Crest, Tybalt's Will, and Flickerstep all come from Duriel. Now I know a lot of you guys are interested in the Melted Heart of Seelig and whether or not we can incorporate this into the build. The answer is yes, this is probably one of the best builds that can make use of the Melted Heart of Seelig. But because we don't know that we actually need that survivability, I would rather keep the damage in the build now and add the survivability in later if we need it. And if we really want to take the survivability of this build to the next level, I've also made a low life version of this build that uses the Seelig, but it's not something I plan to use unless I really need it. I try and make it a habit to make my builds fun and easy to play, but we always have the option of a ton more survivability if we ever need it. Now for the stats on the gear, I highly encourage you to come to the written guide itself, click on this little tab here, and look at all of the stats in detail on every item. I went ahead and recommended stats on every piece of gear, even if I intended a unique to be in the slot, just so that you guys had an option in case you don't have something. However, I didn't do this for Crone because Crone is absolutely required. For our gems, I recommend Emerald on the weapon, Ruby on the armor, and Diamonds on the jewelry. For our vampiric powers, we've got Moonrise and Ravenous for our attack speed, Undying for our healing, Anticipation's reducing our ultimate cooldown, and Metamorphosis is our source of Unstoppable, and this is also going to trigger the Tybalt's Will. For additional details on the build, you can scroll down below on the written guide and read here. I've also included a changelog recently so that you can see the changes I'm making and have an easier time of adjusting your build accordingly. Now for our skill tree, we're going to be maxing out our Claw and our Storm Strike. We're going to be getting Wild Claw and Fierce Storm Strike. The Fierce Storm Strike is how we're getting our vulnerable on the enemies. And then we're moving down, and we're going to grab the Predatory Instinct passive, and we're just going to put 1 point in Digitrograde Gate here. Now for Digitrograde Gate, depending on where your movement speed and attack speed is at, you might need more points here in order to hit the attack speed cap. This is something you can test at the dummy by attacking while your stats are open. If you see when you're attacking that you're hitting 100%, then you don't need the extra points here. I personally cap out with just 1 point. And if my rolls were better, I might not need any. Now, if you need points from somewhere in order to do that, you're going to pull out of Electric Shock. This is good for AoE damage, but it doesn't work on bosses, so this is the safest spot to pull them out of. After that, we're going to be grabbing Cyclone Armor, and we're getting Preserving Cyclone Armor. We'll be grabbing Blood Howl and grabbing Preserving Blood Howl, 1 point in Debilitating Roar, and then we're going to max out Ancestral Fortitude and Vigilance. We can completely skip the Companion Tree, and then for our Wrath skills, we're going to be getting Hurricane and Savage Hurricane. We're going to get 2 points in Endless Tempest, 3 points in Bad Omen, and 3 points in Electric Shock. We're also going to be getting 3 points in Envenom and 1 point in Toxic Claws. For our ultimate, we're going with Petrify, and we're just going to get the 1 point in Prime Petrify. We're going to max out Defiance, and then we're also going to max out Heightened Senses. Finally, for our Keystone passive, we're doing Earth and Might, and if for some reason you don't have the Mighty Storms aspect, you can always run Ursine Strength instead. So on our Paragon boards, with our starter board, we're going to be using the Spirit Glyph. We're going to grab all 4 of the rare nodes, and then we're going to move up to Inner Beast. On Inner Beast, we're going to grab a couple of rare nodes, and we're going to grab Electrocution here. After this, we're going to move to the left, and we're going to grab Thunderstruck. And on the Thunderstruck board, we're going to be getting Earth and Sky. We're going to grab a bunch of rare nodes, and we're going to be grabbing the Thunderstruck Legendary node. Moving back across to the other side, we're going to be getting Heightened Malice, and here we're going to be putting Fang and Claw. You might see that it says 30 out of 40 willpower, but that's just a mobalytics error, so don't worry about that. Back across again above the Thunderstruck board, we're going to be adding Constricting Tendrils. And on this board, we're putting Territorial, and we're going to max this one out. Finally, back across the other side, we're going to be putting the Ancestral Guidance board above Heightened Malice. And here we're going to get Fulminate. Now there's a couple things for me to note here. First off, when AOZ comes out, we're going to be deleting our Ancestral Guidance board completely, and we're going to be dumping a bunch of points into our Heightened Malice, and that's where our Tears of Blood glyph is going to go. We're also going to be losing our Electrocution glyph in the process, but don't worry about it because that Tears of Blood glyph is going to be really good. Now one thing I forgot to mention with the gems is you're actually not going to be putting diamonds on the accessories because you have poison resistance over here on the Heightened Malice, And you also have lightning resistance in the Thunderstruck board. That means that for your accessories, you're going to be putting one of each of the other resistances that you need to cap into those accessory slots. If you happen to have a resistance on one of your pieces of gear, that just means you're going to be able to get more armor out of your accessories by using skulls. This is what it'll look like when you're done. And I made sure that the Abattoir of Zir boards are very similar to this, so you don't have to adjust as much when that comes out. Don't forget, if you're somebody who liked the Ultimate Stormclaw, you can still use that build to great effect. And that one's definitely the easier to play of the two builds. But if you want to maximize your speed and damage as much as possible, this is the build to use. I hope you guys like the changes, and I'm looking forward to doing Abattoir Zero with you. And don't forget to use the sponsor link below, or use the QR code to get Raid Shadow Legends. Now I'll catch you guys in the next video. Daddy Druid out.
There's no earthly way of knowing which direction this game's going.